Well, hello. This is Wade Frazier. This is June 2nd, 2026 at 8:37 a.m. In 2001, Brian O'Leary and I had our epic note trading session, which I've written about plenty. And in that session, as I think when I first heard Brian mention that there were seven cartels that controlled the world economy. And he did not list them at the time, as I recall. But he later did. He later wrote about it. And again, his friend John Rappaport is the one who put a name to it or enumerated them. And again, back to energy, medicine, military, intelligence, banking, organized religion, and media. Those seven. Um, and when he mentioned those, we're in the midst of discussing free energy, my friend's underground technology show, and Brian's right as a apology for free energy and all the crazy reactions of denial and fear he got from leading scientists, environmentalists, and various progressive figures. Um, when he mentioned the seven cartels, I knew even at that time, and I had seen all the seven cartels in action, so it wasn't a surprise when I heard this list, but I knew the kingpin had to be the energy industry, and nothing else comes close. And so, again, we can get into, in terms of revenues, the world's biggest companies, et cetera, but that really is not a good way to look at it, I think. Um, yeah, nothing else comes close to the energy industry as far as its importance in the world economy. In fact, according to Orthodox physics and cosmology, our universe is nothing but energy. And only in the energy racket. And related to stuff is propulsion technology, but it's energy based. All transportation runs off of oil, kind of thing. Uh, Transportation is intimately linked with the energy issue. Again, back to hearing about how high mile per gallon carburetors have been suppressed for a century, all this stuff. Um, and only in the energy racket are people offered immense sums, billions of dollars to cease their efforts before they get the boom alert on them. No other racket can do that. And the deepest pockets on Earth is to protect the energy racket from any threat to the current paradigm of fossil fuels and even the alternatives to be controlled by the global elite. Each epoch of the human journey was founded on its energy practices, and I've written about this at length, from stone tools and fire to the world's megafauna to crops and forests to fossil fuels. Um, Energy has been the central concern of all societies for all time. But the science of energy is young. So if you try to tell somebody about the energy issue, 200 years ago, nobody would know what you're talking about. But they knew what food meant. Food is almost all energy. Only 90% of the nutritional value is energy. It's energy. It's calories are us warm-blooded humans need. Um, our industrialized societies run on the energy of fossil fuels primarily. And as Bucky Fuller said, if oil was priced at the benefit that humanity got from it, it would cost $1 million a barrel. And in my essay that I wrote a couple of years ago, I roughly recalculated that, giving a day in my life as an example. Um, there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else on the world market like oil. And no other cartel can boast of anything remotely similar. And the West's thirst for oil explains everything about its interest in the Middle East for the past century and more. And everything else is a sideshow. Yeah, it's all about the oil. And as I write this, the world is in the midst of an incipient energy crisis, oil crisis that the United States and Israel created when they attacked Iran and killed its leader in a sneak attack. So, and it could get far worse. This is, yeah, Yeah, this could be a banner year for a number of issues. Seeing how bad it can get, or a hint of how bad it can get. But in this century, the end of the fossil fuel era will happen in this century, one way or another. We're rapidly running out of oil. It'll be gone in this century. Even gas, same thing. Coal, even coal will have peaked. Even uranium is peaking. So the thing where, yeah, again, our industrial era based on fossil fuels will end in this century, one way or another. I know what the happy ending looks like, but we'll see. Probably won't live to see it actually, but hope so. At least the happy ending. Um, yeah, and so not only is the energy racket it liberally uses organized suppression to keep any threat to the racket at bay, but it's also preventing the next epoch from the human journey from arriving, which would be the biggest event in the human journey, which I call the fifth epoch. And all the global cartels, all the other, and again, the six that were named, six others that are named, but also it just again the whole world's political economy, and again particularly the cartels, depend on the stranglehold of the energy racket over the world economy and humanity. Yeah, so free energy was used by the public. All rackets would soon end, and our world will end. So very little about today's world will survive for long in what I call the fifth epoch, which is a world of abundance, when abundance and love reign instead of scarcity and fear. And while the organized suppression is impressive, again, the energy racket is they're the champions of organized suppression. All rackets are maintained, though, by what I call 1% conspiracy, 99% complicity. So, I got almost 20 years ago, no, almost 30 years ago, I heard Tom Bearden talk about how the CEOs of the oil companies really aren't in on it. So they're not really part of it. They're just into finding oil and drilling it, or finding it and selling it. The suppression actually hails from higher levels. Tom said ownership, uh, and I can go with that, but the ownership he refers to, you've never heard of. So, yes, the CEOs of oil companies really aren't even in on it. In fact, Stephen Greer, Mr. Disclosure Project guy, and he's pursuing free energy. Um, he hosted a former CEO of one of the big companies, aerospace companies that develops these exotic technologies, of which my friend was shown long ago. Anti-gravity, free energy, a bunch of mind bogglers. And that former CEO, again, Greer named that corporation. It was a big one. I can't remember which one. It was a really big one, big, well-known aerospace corporation, defense contractor type. Kruger mentioned how that company was deeply involved in these kind of reverse engineer, ET tech, again, exotic technology stuff. And that former CEO was completely unaware that those activities were happening at his companies. Yeah, he was told. So the CEO is totally out of the loop on what's really going on at his company. And that reminds me of how out of the loop John Kennedy was in the activities in his administration, including the operation that got him killed. So, and this is just more evidence that, CEOs and presidents are mere figureheads, members of the relatively powerless retail elite, which they say the retail elite. So again, the Donald Trumps, Elon Musk's, Bill Gates, they are not, they do not run the world economy. They're actually they're down a few levels on the hierarchy of power on Earth. And back to that 99% complicity and stuff. So, as I've long written, the best propaganda doesn't look like it. Looks like the news. Looks like education. And one of the things that, again, I was raised to be a scientist, and one of the difficult things I had to come to grips with was that arguably the most brainwashed class of all in our society are scientists themselves. And when the issue of free energy comes up, they have this knee-jerk denial of the possibility of free energy with the laws of physics subjection. And then they dismiss evidence of organized suppression as a conspiracy theory. And as Bucky Fuller said, scientists are just really highly naive. And as Noam Chomsky said, they suffer from the same constraints that nearly all intellectuals in capitalist societies are subjected to. And scientists, again, I came up with a list of free energy awareness long ago. And scientists have their own category. I call it level 3. Basically, again, back to they dismiss free energy's possibility on the so-called laws of physics, and then they deny organized suppression because they dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. Really lazy thinking, and again, it's parroting their indoctrination and conditioning. In fact, as Brian stated, and again, Brian, my God, the last 20 years of his life, he was really campaigning that there needs to be a new science that's free from the constraints of materialism, capitalist constraints, these things. And Brian he was fond of stating that there are no laws of physics. We only have theories. To even use the word law really invokes a religious faith. In fact, I've seen it called a conceit. So it's really a conceit to even use the word law to describe this. And my friend was showing anti-gravity technology. Guy started floating off. And in that light, the so-called law of gravity is something else, isn't it? It's an incomplete theory. Yeah, and that's the cutting, that's the exotic stuff. But again, Dennis sold the rules-based heating system for years. In fact, put the rules-based heating system on people's homes for free, which is when his troubles really began with the energy establishment and the global elite. And his heat pump, garden variety thermodynamics, explains how it operates. I've been writing about this for many years. In fact, in nearly 30 years of writing publicly about the world's best heating system and being assailed by skeptics and the like, I have yet to see one robust discussion of that heat pump. Not one. So humanity seems incapable of having really rational, robust discussions of really simple issues. And especially scientists. And it used to boggle my mind, but I eventually realized that it's just normal. This is humanity. Materialism is a religion. Really, it sits on a false foundation. And I link, again, my company post, I link to my evidence for all this, my posts on these kind of stuff. And then, but it informs the worldview of most scientists. And again, when Brown was at Princeton, at their biweekly luncheons they would have, they'd sit around after their luncheons, sip sherry and ridicule accounts of the paranormal. And on the Princeton's physics staff were several Nobel laureates. And this is not an inconsequential aspect of this issue. It's actually one of the central problems. So scientists are brainwashed, like we're all brainwashed. And this is brainwashed. And again, they're incapable of really dealing with these issues. They're not capable of dealing with them. And so they're naive, they're brainwashed. They sit there and ridicule accounts of the paranormal when it's pretty easy to have paranormal experiences. Except white male professionals, those abilities have atrophied because the way they use their brains. So it's not an inconsequential issue. It's actually one of the central problems. But almost everybody reacts to the idea of free energy with denial and fear. This is something you learn if you're in the field. Everybody acts with denial and fear. And so virtually all of humanity is complicit in this situation. So I really don't want to be, too hard on scientists here. And all of the rackets have intense indoctrination as part of the conditioning of their members. And few ever awake past their indoctrination in anything. And this goes for all humans. So humans, they get early indoctrination and it gives them in-group status with the in-group perks, and they will embrace that indoctrination to their graves, even when embracing that means their certain death, which I had to witness repeatedly before I began to understand what was going on. And so while organized suppression in the energy racket is like nothing else on Earth, nothing else on Earth is like that. The racket is like the others, based on how its members are indoctrinated. So, and as I'll get to probably next post, is going to get into the medical racket, but it's the same thing here. So very few people ever wake past their indoctrination conditioning. In fact, the smart, I think it's worse for them because they're smart. And so they get indoctrinated into something and their intellectual ego gets involved. And it's like, they're never going to admit they were taught rubbish, You know, it's not going to happen. They'll never wake up from their indoctrinated state. And then indoctrination actually does most of the work in keeping the rackets intact. So as I said before, people can't even imagine something like the fifth epoch. We certainly can't pursue it. And that's the greatest triumph of the global elite, is making free energy and the fifth epoch unimaginable. And virtually all of humanity obliges that, especially scientists, again, especially in the energy racket. So, and we toy with our self-extinction right now over the energy issue more than any other. So this is, yeah, we're gonna sink or swim on the energy issue as a species, and in this century it'll get resolved by one way or another. And time is short. So yeah, so this is, again, I'm going to go through all the rackets and each one and how they all have their own set of beliefs, and again, it's all rooted in scarcity and fear. All the dominant ideologies are rooted in scarcity and fear. So that's sort of an overall framework is basically scarcity and fear, but each of the global rackets have their own flavor, let's say, of scarcity and fear-based beliefs that people are indoctrinated into and conditioned, and they never wake up. So this is humanity today. This is why we're on the brink of our self-extinction. So I know who I'm looking for, those disillusioned idealists who drank the Kool-Aid, who eventually realized they were sold an illusion. Those are the people I need, and I'm here to help them. Welcome. You are needed. Time is short. That's all for today.